Hello, everybody. We want to thank you all for coming today. We're really excited to have you and hope you get a lot out of this session. Today, we will go over some techniques for estimating, planning, and tracking Agile software development projects in a way that can make expectations clear for both the software teams and the stakeholders. Our speaker today is Tommy Norman, our Chief Agility Officer here at Acklen Avenue. So, Tommy, let's get started. You can take it from here.
Thanks so much, Tatiana. Let me go ahead and share my presentation. We'll get going here. All right, let's get going. Now, unfortunately, I can't make sure. Is my screen showing, Tatiana? Are we good?
Yes.
All right, awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming to our webinar. We're going to be talking about Agile planning and forecasting in the cold, cruel world. Here's what our agenda is going to be. So we're gonna talk about what we're really always being asked is when and how much, and a little bit about where that comes from and what we're actually trying to do when people are asking those questions. I want to talk about knowing what to estimate. Not necessarily estimating everything we're giving, but how to know what exactly we're estimating, doing an initial estimation, and then knowing what to build really. So, even though we're talking about estimating and planning, we know that's not just ends at the beginning. So we're going to go into, all right, once we actually start into there, how do we know what we're actually going to build, really tracking actual progress as we go along and tracking actual progress as we go along. I have a lot of slides at the beginning kind of setting this up, but then at one point we're going to just jump over and I'm going to show you a lot of the tools that we use here at Acklen. So real quick, just about me, for those of you who don't know me. So I am Tommy Norman. I am the Chief Agility Officer here at Acklen Avenue. Acklen Avenue is custom software development. We have Agile teams and staff aug's. So if you need some help delivering your product backlog and roadmap and need some extra bandwidth and want to do that in Agile way, we're the people to go to. And my job responsibility as Chief Agility Officer is make sure that we are as agile as possible from how we do HR to everything else. Make sure we're getting the right clients and setting ourselves up for success and spreading the word of Agile like I'm doing here today. I also do a couple other things if you are in Nashville area. So I run the Agile Nashville user group, agilenashville.com. And we have started meeting back in person. We've had 3 meetings. We have one next Monday, which I think we're talking about definition of done. The topics get discussed and decided by the actual attendees. It's an open discussion, facilitated discussion we have. Very highly attended, lots of great stuff come out of that. So if you want to sign up, go to agilenashville.com. Also, I want to mention Music City Agile, which unfortunately we're not going to do this year. We just decided 2 weeks ago that we don't have time to plan it for this year, but it will be coming back. It's part of a larger conference, Music City Tech. So if you go to musiccitytech.com, you can also sign up there to get notified when that is announced as well. So just 2 organizations here in Nashville that I'm a part of. Also, if you like what you're seeing here and you have a subscription to O'Reilly Online Learning, which used to be Safari Books Online, I have a lot of this content is also pre-recorded, and I guess it's probably almost 20 hours worth of stuff on there now on Scrum Fundamentals, Scrum Advanced, product owners, Scrum product owners, and Lean and Agile stuff for combining Lean into your Scrum. And I'm about to do some more videos this fall. One will be some of this Agile planning and metric stuff in there as well. And then lastly, here at Acklen, we are regularly doing this type of content. So we are doing webinars like this every few months. And then also we have something called Acklen Avenue Office Hours, which is just, I'm available for an hour every 4 weeks where we just get together and kind of talk, and you can bring any questions. We just kind of chat. The chat kind of goes wherever it wants to, basically a free hour of consulting. So I will give links to all of these things at the end that you can get. And you also get a copy of this presentation in PDF format with a follow-up email. So with that, let's get into it. Also, just real quick on questions. So I am going to hold questions to the end. We're recording this. And so I'm going to try to get through the content, and then we'll stop the recording there. That's what we're going to put online. So if you need to refer back to this or you want to send it to someone else online, that'll be perfect. But I will do all the questions at the end. If you want to put them in chat, just so we don't forget them, you can put them in there, but then I'll open it up at the end for you to ask those questions once I'm done. All right, let's talk about when and how much. So this is a question we always get. We're about to start any kind of, project, software development project. First thing we're going to be asked is when and how much. And, a lot of times people will say, well, it's kind of like, we're driving to grandma's house across country and, we need to have a plan. Well, it's nothing like that. Software is not like that. The reason is because when we're doing this, we say, oh, I'm going from point A to point B and it's a straight shot. Maybe when I'm driving, but when we're actually doing a project, this is more of what it looks like. I don't even, I don't go in a straight line and I don't even wind up halfway through. We wind up figuring out that B is not where we want to go. And we end up at Z, at a totally different thing. And everything's on fire while we're doing it. So a lot of, I constantly hear all these people talking about like comparing software to building a house. Software is nothing like building a house unless you have a house compiler I don't know about. All the time and effort that goes into different places are different than most of these analogies. So I'm a big fan of planning is essential, estimating is essential, but plans and estimates are useless because they only survive so long. So this is something I'm constantly doing. I'm constantly coming up and redoing the plan. I'm constantly estimating or re-estimating things and having conversations about it. We'll get into that a little bit later. About the conversation we're having is probably the most important thing of all these techniques anyway. So, we're going to get this question. People are always going to think that it's a lot simpler than it is. And, you have the iron triangle of project management. If you're a PMI person, you have seen this triangle plenty of times. I think they've added new stuff to it. It's now the iron quadrihedron or something. I don't know what it is. But, even though this is, some people kind of equate this to PMI, you can't get away from it, no matter what you do. Time, money, and scope. You get to choose two of those to negotiate. Or two to set and one to negotiate. And also some of those are, you can only do so much, like there's only so much money you can put in before you get, a diminishing return on time, on your time and money. So, we'll talk a lot more about scope is actually the only thing that I can change right meow and know the effects. I can throw more money at it, but I don't know how well that's going to do until later on. I can put more time on it, but I don't know how well that's going to actually help my plan until later on. Where scope, I have a little bit more. We'll get more into that later. But the iron triangle doesn't go away, whether I'm doing an agile project, a waterfall project, it doesn't matter. Those are still things that constraints that I have to work inside and manage too. Now we need to have a little bit of empathy for the people who are asking this. The questions they're asking about this, it's about return on investment. They have some idea. They're going to put some money into it. There's going to be some process that we're going to go through with a group of people. And we need, there's time to market is sometimes very crucial. And at the end, we're going to get money for it somehow. Either that's revenue because we're building a product, selling that, or it's cost savings because we're building something internally that's going to make us faster or better or more efficient. But there's some type of return. If I put $1 in, I need $2 back or whatever it is. So, this is really, yes, it is about when and how much, but it's about that so that I can understand, is this juice worth the squeeze? And to even go a little bit more meta about it, this is really about fear. Whoever is asking this question of you is afraid. They have just been given responsibility or budget responsibility, or their neck's on the line for some type of project. And I know Agile people don't like the word project, for some type of engagement, for some type of effort. And, they have these fears of, if this fails, I might get fired. I've been in that meeting. I've had a client sit me down and say, Tommy, if this project doesn't go well, I'll probably be fired. That motivates people. That changes how they behave. If this fails, I'll lose influence. I may not be fired, but I may not get the next cool project. If this fails, I may not get my bonus. I might have compensation tied to this. If this fails, the company might be at risk. And, not only, would all these things about me, but I also, if we don't get to the market in time, somebody beats us and we miss out and the company goes, bankrupt or has to shut down, whatever it is. So when we are dealing with this, we do have to have empathy for the other side of that. They are usually acting somewhere, even subconsciously, about fear. And what we're trying to do with any type of estimate, with any type of plan, with any type of tracking is to calm those fears as much as possible in a practical way, but also just be open. a thing about Agile is it's a sharp stick of truth pretty much every 2 weeks. If you're doing Scrum or whatever it is, you're not going to make it. You don't have enough people. You've bitten off more you can chew. It's that sharp, stick. The nice thing about waterfall is you didn't really get that until the end. You could be happy for months, and then it's really only the last couple of months that then you go, oh, shit. But now, we have Agile, which is kind of exposing all these problems. And it can feel, it can make you very afraid. Like, what are we going to do about this? I thought if we had a Gantt chart with a nice little diamond at the end, milestone that said this date was going to be when we did it, we'd be okay. And the thing is you were never okay. If you've done any project of any size and complexity, you've never made that same date. It's always going to be some type of change. We're talking about Agile projects. And if in Agile, one of the core tenets is I embrace change. I embrace changing requirements, even at the last possible moment, then your estimates and your plans are all going to have to change as well. So let's talk about how we can do, but we still have to have some kind of expectation. People are still, wanting to know how much money am I going to have to invest? How much time? How much do I need to allocate people? So I still need to have some way of conveying that. And let's talk about how we can do that in an Agile manner. So the first thing I want to talk about is knowing what to estimate. So a little bit of background, number one, I've been doing this for a long time. And I've been pretty much in every role you can have. I was a cable monkey and ran cable and did network support and desktop support. I was a developer. I was a leader of developers, an architect. I was a QA manager. I've been the product owner I've been in all these roles. And now I'm an executive. I've been executive where I had to, I had profit and loss responsibility for the things we're doing. And so I've had to do this from a lot of different aspects. And especially right now, where I'm at now, is with Acklen, we sell Agile teams as a complete service and you pay for them by the week. And so clients come to us. I'm getting a new client every, 6 months or so. We get a new client for one of our teams and they want to have some type of estimate, most likely. And I have to give them that. And then we have to then manage their expectations throughout the whole thing on a project in a company I have never met before the day I meet them. And usually they want an estimate after a 2-hour conversation. So what you're going to see here is what for a decade we've been crafting here at Acklen on how to address that, how to calm those fears of people who are about to give us a bunch of money and have all these fears on them about the return on investment, but do it in a practical way and then also constantly kind of manage and set expectations throughout the project. So the first thing is when somebody walks in and says, I have this big project, when and how much, is knowing what to estimate and what not to estimate. So the first thing I want to just get clear is concept of cash. This is a lean principle, has been around forever. I have some idea. I need to get, this idea out in the world and making money. Whatever gets me there as fast as possible with an acceptable level of quality without killing all of my team members, and that maximizes the value and return on investment and learning that I get is good. And anything that doesn't do that is bad. I don't care what we call it. I don't care if we call it Agile, Scrum, Scrumban, Kanban, Aardvark, don't care. This is what people need to do. I have this idea. I need to get some value out of it. So when we're talking about this, we need to be focusing on value. Unfortunately, that's not a lot of times what people bring to me. Sometimes what people bring to me is functional requirements, FRDs, BRDs, business requirements documents, functional requirements. So they bring me all this documentation and say, estimate, tell me, look at this and tell me how long this will take. And this is, the worst way to do this. Number one, the written word we know is the worst way to convey information. Also, when you look at some of this traditional documentation like this, there's a lot that's missing. There's a lot that's implied or seems to be implied, and it doesn't lead to actually good estimates. People think that it does, but it doesn't. One, there's large gaps between the requirements, depending on how they send it to me. If you have these bunch of, you remember the old days, the system shall, the system shall, the system shall, the system shall do this, system shall do this. But then how does it do that? You said this and this, and there's a lot of in between that line, there's a lot of stuff that could go on. There's these big gaps sometimes in the way people document things. There's implied or assumed functionality. A lot of times people come, especially startups, come to us and they have all their mockups. And that's, they give me all their pixel perfect mockups of how everything should look. And they say, tell me how long that will take. And I'm like, that is not a great way to estimate something, because when you give me just the picture of what the final thing is, there's so much implied in there and how things connect that I don't know, that it's really hard to get down to the nitty-gritty of that. There's little to no prioritization. Usually when they give it to me, it's everything. Here's, all the stuff, everything in the kitchen sink. And that's just because, one, they've been taught that from waterfall. If they've been around for any time and done waterfall things, they've been taught that you give me all the requirements up front, and then I'm going to go away for 6 to 8 months and then come back. And if you forget anything, I'm going to punish you for it. Especially if they've done outsourcing, where they've outsourced projects and you kind of agree to everything and sign in blood and say, that's what we're going to do. And then if you change your mind, because we've all put, this time and date, we've set it in stone, I'm going to beat you up with change management process. So they are trained to give me everything in the kitchen sink. Since we are an Agile company, we're still time and materials. So if you change your mind, if we get 3 months into it and you said at the beginning you want to do ABC, and after B we learn something and we go, I kind of want to do D, I'm like, okay, let's then take D and understand it and put it in our release plan and see what the effect is, but we'll switch. So kind of untraining in that you don't have to know everything right now. You have to know enough to get started. We have to know enough to, is this a feasible thing for us to do? But I don't have to know every last detail. You don't have to give me everything in the kitchen sink, because I'm going to allow you to learn as you go along. And then, like I said, more information is not always better. And now I've been trained to be nice. When people come to me and they bring all their documents in it, I have to look at it. It's their baby. And nobody, you have to tell them their baby is cute, just like every other's baby. And I have to pay it attention. But then I ask their permission to say, can I set this aside for a little bit and have some conversations with you? And we'll come back to this. I don't want to start with your documentation. I don't want you to come to me with the solution already in hand, because there could be so much that's missed inside there. So when I first start having these conversations with them, it's less about what and how and more about who and why. So I spend a lot of time talking about the product vision. And as part of their product vision, I talk about their market. Who are your personas? Who are the people who are actually going to be using this? And then for each of those people, what is the goal they're trying to accomplish with this system? Don't tell me about screens. Don't tell me about database fields. I don't care at this point in time. Now I do care. I have to say that. I have to say I do care. But at this point in time, I want to hear about, tell me, when I say personas, I don't mean roles. Somebody will say, well, the checking account holders. Tell me a story about them. Who is this person? This is Martha, and she's got a bunch of kids in her car, and she needs to get $60 for a pizza party, and she doesn't have time to go into the bank. She needs $60. She wants to drive up to the ATM and get $60 out there. Okay, now you just told me Martha. You gave me a little bit of you've made it real to me and what their goal is. And then when I do that enough times, I can then start saying, all right, what is the simplest path that I can get through this system I'm about to build to get these personas to their goals? I'll also ask people to prioritize those goals. If you could only solve one of these problems, I need to solve all of them, Tommy. I get that. But if you could only solve one of them, which one would it be? I start people from day one ruthlessly prioritizing. Now, I'm not allowed to say this anymore. Sales doesn't like it to say anymore, but I always used to say at the beginning of a project, like, listen, I'm going to disappoint you somehow. Let's just get that. Let's just be clear. Your expectations, every client's expectations are very, very high. And I am probably not going to meet them because they're probably maybe a little unrealistic. But so I want you to start from ruthless prioritization, as if we're not going to make it. I'm not a very Pollyanna person. I'm a pessimistic person. Start as if we're not going to make it. And I'm going to make you ruthless prioritize so that we get all those things done. And then if we do have plenty of time left over, great. I have all this extra stuff I can put in there, but the core of the app of what needs to be there is done. And I believe that personas and goals is a crucial way to doing that. So don't, if you've given me a lot of what and how in screenshots and functional requirements, that's great. I'm going to put it over here for a second, but I'm going to mainly focus on this when we first have these conversations. So, we'll do a couple of things like a short product vision. What is your product? Tell me what it's about. Who is this after? How is it going to gain you in the market and get you there? Again, I'll want to know personas and goals. And these don't have to be in depth. If you have them already, it's great, but a lot of people don't. Most people don't. But tell me a little bit about what they are and give me enough information so I can start kind of connecting dots from a persona to a goal. I like to do story mapping. some kind of high level story mapping, and there is kind of what Jeff Patton has put out with story mapping. I have a whole presentation just on visual story slicing we'll be doing soon about taking story mapping, but using it with personas and goals in mind rather than functional chunks. Excuse me. And that's where I get into what I call visual story slicing, which is once I get down to a story, even more ruthlessly cutting that story down to just getting this persona to that goal and no more, no less. And this really helps us get to slice through these big functional things and just slice through and say, but what is the minimal thing I need to satisfy the need of the customer? We can definitely talk about exciters and things like that. You can definitely bring those back into scope if you say, yeah, this isn't necessary to get them there, but it's going to be a differentiator. It's going to be an exciter. It's going to set us above everybody else. Okay, great. It's not necessarily a goal for the user. It's a goal for the company, in that if I put this in there, it will help me against my competitors. So as I said, people come to us all the time with tons of information. And I've put a link here to Simula Research. I found these guys years and years and years ago, and they have so many studies about giving teams X number of information and seeing how they did. And so they would give somebody, a team, the core information, just basic stripped down. And then they would give another team the same information, but just put a lot of like, oh, it's on a Windows 10 platform, and this is the blah, 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 and all extra information. And of course, the team with the extra information always overestimated and overbuilt. They just naturally did. And they have things on estimates. It's really some really good study stuff there if you want to go listen to it. It's educational, so it's dry, but it's some good stuff. But they have all these studies that talk about that more information usually leads to overestimation. I'm going to estimate high. It takes time to sort through it. Like as soon as I get a big document, like somebody sends me a PDF and I have to open it, I immediately look at page count. And when I see, 120 pages, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to sort through this. It's going to take me more time to kind of find what the information I really need out of it. Sometimes then to just set it aside and say, just tell me again. It'll actually be shorter. Also, a lot of times it focuses you on the wrong details, especially like UX mockups. I've been in a discussion where we're talking about a flow of something, but we did it with pixel perfect mockups. And we got into a 90-minute discussion on whether this was the right red and whether this line was thick enough. And I'm like, I don't need to be talking about that right now. And you're missing the whole point. It gets distracting because there's so much information there. So when we get this, I want to have conversations. Yes, you had conversations before you came to me, and that's where you got all this documentation, but I wasn't in that conversation. And sometimes what I miss is important. So if people are talking about, and they said, hey, we should probably do X. And then somebody says, well, if we're going to do X, maybe Y is a better option. And then somebody else comes and says, well, I've actually done Z, and it beats out both of them. They go, oh, you're right. Let's document Z. But missing that conversation is important, because then I get this and I go, well, why the heck are they not doing X? And it kind of has to be retread. Now, obviously you can't be in every conversation, but I do try to say, take this documentation, put it over here for a second. Let me do some of this product visioning, a little bit of identifying personas and goals, do some story mapping and flows through with that. And then this documentation will be color commentary to that, and it will help with that. But, have that conversation with me. Yes, you had it, but you've probably had it 20 times internally. And I always ask permission and I set them up. Hey, I know you've probably done this and it feels like you're rehashing old stuff, but you've not had that conversation with me, and it's important. So also, when I get in this conversation, I want to have the right conversation. So there's something called red barn, blue barn questions. If I came and said, Tatiana, I want you to paint my barn, and I need to know when and how much. And the first thing Tatiana said is, do you want it red or blue? I would go, why is that your first question? That doesn't have any impact on your estimate. It shouldn't. You can actually ask that right before you go get in the paint. You should be asking me, how big is your barn? Are we painting, the inside and the outside? Are we painting the roof? Is there a lot of nooks and crannies? That should be the questions. The questions should be about the boundaries and sizing and complexity, and not about that detail that can be left to a later responsible moment. So if the answer to this question won't significantly affect the scope or the implementation complexity effort, I don't need to talk about it right now. In IT, we've probably all been in a 30-minute discussion on how big an email field should be. And yes, I eventually need to have that discussion, but I could probably have that discussion right before I actually make the field. I don't need to have it very far in advance. So I explain this to a lot of my customers and all my teams so that if we get into a discussion, I can use this as a kind of a thing of saying that smells like a red barn, blue barn question. And they might go, you're right. And I'll say, will it significantly affect scope or implementation? And a lot of times I get the answer, no, but you need to know it. Great, but I don't need to know it right now. I will need to know it. Know that this is not the last time you have this conversation with me. That's their fear. Remember, it's all about fear. Their fear is, if I don't tell you now, it'll get lost. And I will still capture it, but I might capture it and put it over to the side. That's great. Good detail, but I'm going to put it over here. I don't want to spend any more time talking about it. This is not what I need right now, because right now we're mainly focusing on estimating, and that kind of level of detail is something I don't need. So what do I need? What should I focus on? And this is what I like to focus on when I'm doing estimating. Boundaries. Where are the boundaries of the application? Where does one thing end and another thing end? What's inside of it is less as important as more of just the boundary of it itself. Integrations. Anytime it touches something outside. So if I have to go to another service that's outside your system, either a third party or another team owns it, that's important for me to know. One, because somebody will say, oh, they have a well-documented and easy use API. That is 90% a lie, almost every time. Anytime I touch a system outside of the system I control, the complexity immediately goes up until proven otherwise. So integration points is always a big thing. Anything I have to touch outside of my own system. The size of data. So if you're saying here is, we need to capture this information for the contact, and I need first name, last name, let me stop you there. You don't need to list all the names. You don't need to list all the fields, not for estimation. Just tell me generally about how many are there. It's about 20 fields. Okay, that's good. And then I want logic complexity. Of those fields, how many of them have to go get data from someplace else? That is an integration and a boundary question. Of those fields, how many of them have like some real complex logic around, validation or anything like that? First name, that's a first name field, usually you can not put more than, X number of characters in it, blah, blah, blah. We have this kind of check, blah, blah. That's a basic validation. So I might say there's 20 fields. 10 of them are just simple, data entry with basic validations. 5 of them are integrations into an outside source to get this data. And 5 of them have, this level of complexity of logic behind them. That's information I need to know. I don't need to know the individual fields at this moment. And then lastly, I don't know why these are out of order. Sorry about that. Users. I want to know, what is the user actually trying to do? And then all of this is tempering the boundaries of what they're touching that the user needs to do. So that's when I'm having these discussions. That's what I'm really focusing on. And if they try to get in there, and they're going to, because they're excited and they want to make sure, again, I want to show you my baby. My baby is pretty. I have to tell them their baby. Yes, your baby is pretty, but I don't need to know about that right now. Don't tell me about the pregnancy. Just show me the baby. Or also they are afraid that details will get missed and they'll be important, and they'll say, oh, well, this logic is blah, blah. I'm like, I don't need to know that. I just need to know if there is additional logic that I need to have a service for. I just need to know that because I need to know the boundary. I don't need to know necessarily what that logic is at this point in time. I just need to know, is it, high, medium, low complexity? So you can explain that to me. And once I've made a determination on that, I can move on. So like I said, users, I think is important. You have this big idea, but user personas and goals, I cannot stress enough that is when I really started using that. And it's probably about a decade ago that I really kind of learned to use that a lot better. It completely changed how I did requirements. Back in the old days, I wrote a lot of system shall do this. And if you remember, Rupp used to have these tools that would come in and pull all those out and, write your code for you. And it never worked. But really understanding what the user needs and their goals is always where I start. And it always helps me. Everything down there is a little bit easier because I can just totally focus on, I need to make that person happy. I need to get them to their goal in a simple and easy way. That's my main focus. The boundaries, again, is just, focusing on that user. So when I talk to that user, I am going to walk through it. but I don't need all these details of each thing. Yes, I know there's going to be user interface. Yes, I know there's going to be a service layer. Yes, I know there's going to be a data layer, but I don't need to talk about that technical layer at this point in time. I just need to really map through what they need to do to get to that point in time. So that's where the boundaries integrations come through. So there's what our system does, and then there's systems that I have to touch outside of that system. And then also knowing, all right, is that system internal? Like we can make changes to it if we need to, if that API doesn't supply what we need to, or is an external system that I have no control over it whatsoever. That also adds a degree of complexity in it. Sometimes there's APIs that I'm consuming that are outside of my control and I can't change them and they just are what they are. Sometimes it's an API that is another team, but I could ask that team to make changes if I needed to. I also need to know if they're already written or not, because a lot of times people will say, oh yeah, there's an API for that. Is there, or will there be? Well, don't worry. By the time you get there, we'll have that API. Oh, I'm going to worry about it. That adds some complexity because again, that is outside of my control of my team. And I can only estimate what my team can do. We talked about this before, data size and complexity. How complex is the data? How complex are the validations? What other systems are involved? How complex is the user interface? The place where a UI mockup might be nice is if you have some weird way of getting the data, if it's not just straightforward data entry. We're going to do a drag and drop thing like this and Okay, that's something I do need to know because that is an unusual way of collecting the data. How much data is going to be collected, for performance reasons and things like that. So size and the complexity of the logic. You don't need to tell me every one of these fields. I don't need to know that. So like if I was looking at this one and somebody said, my question would be, all right, is there any real logic in this for the address? Are we gonna do any kind of geological validation and, make sure that matches up to a database or anything like that? No, it's just simple data validation. All right, then I've got what? 10 fields here, basic validation form. That's what I would be estimating. I don't care, what the actual fields are at this moment. So how I do this is in Whiteboard Sessions. This is a very, very simplistic example we did for a nonprofit that we did. But you can see here, I first started over on the side with guest and volunteer. Who are the people who use this system? Tell me a little bit about them. And then, what are their goals? You see in red on the other side. And then it's all about kind of mapping to get over there. How do I get that person to there? And I will say there is no rhyme or reason to like, why did you make one a square and one that little weird stop sign thing? I don't know. It's usually just whatever strikes me at the moment. I try to keep them simple as possible with basically circles, squares, and connectors. Don't do anything more complex than that because I just want to see the flow of information, what types of things you're interacting with, what do I need to do to get you to that goal? And so, this is usually where I start is with a whiteboard like this. We usually take an hour, 2 hours sometimes, depending on the complexity of something. And even again, if they sent me a whole bunch of documentation, I will still say, that's great. I'm going to set this to the side. Let's do this first. And then I might then use this documentation to kind of, flavor this. So if they did give me a screen mock-up of the register guest screen, afterwards, I might take a picture of this and put it on top of there so I can kind of have some form of reference for it. But I like the conversation first. And they're like, well, I can send you, like I even had somebody who already had drawings like this. And they're like, I want to send you a drawing. I'm like, I still want to make it with you. The conversation is important. I just did this with a client who is not English speaking. They speak English, but their app is all in Spanish. So they sent me screenshots and tried to explain everything it did afterwards, but I couldn't read the screenshot. And so it was really hard for me to understand. And I said, this is great, but I still need you to walk through this with me. So that's how I get the information. And that's really high level. And, there's different techniques for it. So I don't really prescribe a given technique. The whiteboarding and then those rules is really kind of where we go. And then I use that to kind of pivot if I need to, once I get in there. Then it's about how do I actually estimate from the information I learned from that? And that's where this initial estimation part comes in. So one thing is I always alert the clients that I'm doing this. We are at the point of maximum ignorance when you ask me this question. I am the dumbest I'm ever going to be on this project at the moment you ask me the most crucial question about it. So let's just all know that going in. You have a 2-hour conversation with me, expecting me to come in with a picture perfect plan is a little ridiculous. That is an unrealistic expectation. But you need something. I get that. I still have to go to boards of directors. I still have to have something. I have to go ask for money. I have to get approval. I still need something. Perfectly understanding. Just know that if you are doing an agile software, if you're doing any software development project, whatever you think you know at this point in time is most likely wrong. That's why I try to reflect that on what I don't know in the estimate. Sometimes that scares people. They want an estimate that shows them that they have everything covered. And I don't think that it's possible. Not everything is changes as much. Some things are a little bit more finite, but there's always going to be some degree of change and learning as you go through this anyway. So understanding, I'm going to do the best I can at this point with the information I have now. And I love this quote from Steve McConnell. The primary purpose of software estimation is not to predict a project's outcome. It's not to have that little Gantt chart with a milestone at the end. It is to determine whether a project's targets are realistic enough to allow the project to be controlled to meet them. Is it feasible? And that's really what I use this. When I'll show you what these estimates actually look like here in just a minute. But it's more of saying, hey, does this scare you? Because if this scares you, if this money or time or effort scares you, then that's a different conversation. But if that sounds reasonable, sounds feasible, and the way we've talked this through makes us feel like it's feasible to us to be able to do it, then it's accomplished what we've needed. So estimation factors, I've already talked about some of these. Identifying, any key assumptions. I'm just going to go through this. I don't know why they're all out of order. I got to go back and change this. So outline those boundaries. Identify key assumptions, levels of uncertainty. Some things are more certain than others, and I'll show you in the estimation worksheet how I do this. I don't try to be too specific, because if you try to be too specific, people will take it and say, ooh, that's set. That's more accurate. It belays a sense of accuracy that's not really there. I always estimate in ranges, and it's always relative to the team's past. Now, I am lucky that my team stay together. So maybe I haven't worked with you before, but we've done a web project before. We've done an e-commerce project before, and I know what their ability to crank out those types of things are. So I can use that as, a little bit of kind of empirical data for how it's going to work with you. It's not an exact match because it's a whole different, again, you're different, everybody's different, but it gives me some place to start. If I don't really have any kind of empirical evidence on the team, I have to start with something. But just know that then I'm making it up. And then the second the team starts executing, I have to realign my expectations with that. So let me do this. I'm going to actually share. Let me stop sharing, and I'm going to share something different. And I'm actually going to just show you all of this stuff. So right now, everybody should see an estimation worksheet. Correct, Mundo? See?
Yes.
¿Es verdad? Claro. Buenas. Okay. So this is an example one, but it is exactly what I show clients. So remember, I went through all that whiteboarding, things like that. I break things down into kind of logical things. And also the way I break it down is not the way I'm necessarily going to deliver it. I don't have time to really slice everything down into small user stories in this amount of time with a couple hours. So there still will be large chunks: view calendar, view list of careers, view your career details. It's still in large chunks. I'll put in the description basically what I need to do, and you'll see I use the word like ability to do this. The user can do this, view this. It will have some implementation in it, but I try to be as focused on the user as possible. Then any assumptions I have in there that when I talked to the technical team about how we're going to implement this. So, all right, we're going to do sign up and login. We're going to assume we're using something like Auth0 or Okta, because that's going, if I had to hand roll this is a lot more complex than that. And if I use something that is kind of a bootstrapper like that, then a lot of those things are, I don't have to do. If we have any questions during an estimation session, I put them in here, and then I go revisit the client and try to answer those questions. If we need to move on to estimate it, if there's an outstanding question, I'll answer it with an assumption and put it in here. But then I'll come back and validate those. If there's something that, again, outstanding questions should be anything that significantly affects scope or implementation. Then I will ask them, and you notice here we do an half week increments. That's as small as we get. We're not going to say 2.75 hours because that's ridiculous. And it belays a sense of accuracy that's not really there. So half week increments. And then I say, if everything, all the assumptions prove correct, and you just need to do this information based on what we've done before, how long do you think that would take? And we're talking how long that would take from the second I pull that card into progress to delivering it to the client, usually in their staging environment because we don't have access to production, but if we have access to production. So that's QA, that's all the stuff that would go in there. And this should be your optimistic estimation. Don't pad at this point in time. So they'll tell me they're optimistic. And then I'll ask them, how certain are you about that? We have this uncertainty. One is there's very little uncertainty in here. So like logins and sign up screens using Okta or Auth0, we've done that tons of times. So there's very little uncertainty in there. So that would be a 1. And then that creates my variance. So everything gets a variance because there's always room to grow in something. Yes, this may be, but they may come and say, ooh, I want to reskin everything in this special way. And it adds some complexity. So you'll see here what a 1 adds is 25%. That's what the range will be. If it is a 2, so here is a view calendar, list of scheduled tasks, view a calendar with scheduled tasks. I've seen these a ton of times before. We've seen them in everything. And somebody usually say, make it look like Outlook or like Google Calendar. Okay. But then there's probably a lot of implied functionality that you may or may not need. So I'll put a 2 on that. I know what you're asking, but there may be some things I don't know. That'll add 50% on it. Now here, let me find one. There's somewhere in here where I think we're hitting like here, chat. So they talked about having the ability to chat, but we're sending text messages. We're integrating with, they haven't identified the third-party system we're going to use to send text messages. So again, now there's a third-party system I'm connecting to that I don't even know what it is yet. You automatically get a 3. And that will double the estimate. So you notice here, it doubled that. So this helps in a lot of ways. One, it helps us really kind of not pad everything equally because everything doesn't need the same equal padding. Some things I've done that are pretty rote and are not going to change as much. It also helps me identify things that are risky because I don't know a lot. And so when I start the project with you, I will usually identify all of those and I will do code spikes, or those are maybe the stories we groom first to kind of de-risk some of that. So it shows you it's better than just kind of oh, that'll take about, X number of weeks, kind of backing up and just giving the whole thing. I am looking at individual things. I am looking at complexity, and I'm trying to show you an optimistic versus a pessimistic total. And so when you go to these totals, the way we do it is I take those totals up. I then take about 25% off of that because it's not like we're doing one thing and only one thing and then starting the next thing. There's overlap. Some people are designing the next one and talking about it while we're doing it. Somebody are testing the next one. What we found is 25% overlap for like web development is pretty typical. If it's mobile development, especially if you're doing native and you have to do an Android and an iOS at the same time, I take that down because there's not as much overlap. There's a lot of dual things going on. We might lower that to 15% or something like that. So we take that down and we then round that up. And then we always have a 2-week sprint 0 starting with the client, 1 week of discovery and 1 week of setup to kind of get things going. So I add that 2 weeks in there, and then I know exactly how much my teams cost per week. So I can give you this estimate low and high of a range, time, and count. And that is what we give every, if they require. Some clients are like, I know we're going to flow. I'm more interested in the process than the outcomes. Let's go. But 90% of the time we have to give something like this. And this is what we will show them. And it also helps me if they are really nervous about this and they need, oh man, I need more information. They need more detail. I need more of that. All right. Maybe you're not as agile as you think you are, and maybe you're not a good fit for us. It kind of is a litmus test for me to know whether it's a good fit. But this is what we landed on. It is for short engagements. This is a pretty, it's a little bit longer, but like a lot of times we'll get engagements that are sometimes between 12, 16, 18 weeks. We usually land in the middle somewhere, almost always in there. Now on larger engagements, they keep rolling and they keep adding things to it. So we just kind of eventually become good past this because we start adding things, but it's enough to kind of say, is this feasible? Did you like how we broke things down? Do you see how we broke it down and how we identified uncertainty? Does it make you comfortable? Does it alleviate your fears that I heard you and I know what we need to build? And then, is this juice going to be worth this squeeze? You know the value better than I. So I just showed you how long it's going to take, I believe, a range, and about what it should be. And when we present this, we always say, hope for the best, plan for the worst. If you're going to go ask for money, ask for the last one. Because sometimes clients will come and say, oh, 16 weeks. Yeah, I can get budget for that. No, that's not what I said. I said, that's the very optimistic one, but you probably lie somewhere in between there. So that's what our estimation looks like. Now, once we start, then I go through what I did in that whiteboard, but I do it even deeper. So let me show you. This is an example of a Miro board we use for discovery. Now, we let our teams kind of customize as they need to, and there's a lot more to it. They do some introductory things and stuff like that. But this is the basics. So we do a product vision. I'm a big fan of Roman Pilcher. That's where these templates come from. So we'll do a product vision. What is your vision, your target groups, their needs, what is your product going to offer for that? What are your business goals? And for business goals, like, what are your drivers? Do you have any timelines? Do you need to do, are you trying to get seed investment? So, when's your next round of seed investment? I want to know business goals so I can help you get to there. Then we'll go and break down personas. And this is a pretty simple persona. We give it a picture and a name. We like goofy ones off the internet. A little bit of details, enough demographics that would affect how I think about this user, but I'm mainly focused on what are their goals. What are the main things they need to accomplish with this? And then I'll take those goals and that product vision, and you'll see the story mapping. I put the product vision, I put the personas in there, I put their big goals in there, and then we start breaking those goals down to smaller goals. We also start prioritizing those, moving goals up and down, depending on when I need to get them done. This is the first one. And again, they might say, I need all three of these goals. That's great. But if I could only deliver one, which one would you want? Start ruthlessly prioritizing now. Then we'll take some of the top ones and we'll actually walk through these in visual story slicing. Take the persona and their goal and try to get through as simple steps as possible. And you see these ones below the line. These are ones where there could be two ways to go. And I'm like, which one do we need to do? Choose one. And this is splitting these stories and slicing them into small little pieces. Again, I have a whole different presentation to go over visual story slicing. I think it's great, but that gets us down into the stories. So we're going from macro level down to micro level. And we come out of that discovery with not every story identified, but we have a general roadmap with the story mapping. And then I usually have a handful of stories that are well crafted that I can feed into them. And then we just start grooming stories and refining stories as we go along. Again, still using boundaries and things like that. Once I get into the story slicing, didn't mean to do that. Once we get into story slicing, that's when I start getting into details. That's when you can tell me how many fields what exact fields we need. You can really look at UX and talk like that. But at these higher levels, I don't need to know that because it's more about what the user needs to do and getting them there. So once we build all those stories, then we put that into our Trello board. So when I show people our Trello board, the first thing they say is, let me scroll and 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 scroll. And people go, wow, that's a really long Trello board. You're right. So we are more of a Kanban shop. So this is not the simple Scrum board. You noticed here, they have a way of, some of this is like, resources and templates and stuff like that. So we really start here. New request comes in. This is a place that people can just dump in new request. Then as we go into grooming, we'll groom them. Some things will be epics and we just keep them as a placeholder here so we can carve off stories from them. And as we carve off stories, it's like medium priority, medium, lower, high priority. Then we'll take the priority ones and they go to be groomed and they're groomed. We build UI. Not everybody has the same setup, but it's kind of this basic setup. Once we've got a card and this card is now ready to play, it goes into on deck. We always try to keep a queue of 4 cards that are groomed, ready to play for the team to pull from. Then it goes into our whip. Because we're not Scrum, we're more Kanban, we actually have a planning lane in here. Even though we've probably groomed this card several times, there's always a refresh to conversation. And this is any last details. This is the last responsible moment to get all of those details. And then I'm not going through all these, but you can see developing, ready for code review, code reviewing, ready for UI. So I have wait lanes in here. Because of this board, I know where something is at any given time. I know who's got it. I know what branch it's in. So at any time I need to know where something is, I can know exactly where it is. We also don't have to do a lot of tasking out because the tasks are kind of built into the board. So this way of doing the board is not for everybody. We found it very, very useful. And we get lots of good data from it, which is great because then you see something like, hold on, let me move this guy over. We get data like this. Now, I have a whole presentation about data, so don't get all excited about this. I'm not going to explain this. But you can see here, I've got cycle time, I've got cars delivered, which gives me a delivery rate. So I have a pessimistic and optimistic delivery rate. Just so like I gave you a range in the estimation, when I do planning and release planning, I do ranges as well. I have, how many bugs, all sorts of data. But what this data does is it informs me on how is my release plan going to be affected. My delivery rate changes over time. If I'm getting high bugs and stuff like that, that means they're going to get put on my backlog and push things down. So I need to track bugs. All of this information then allows me to go to my release plan. So this is a very simplified version of our release plan, but at its core, this is what it is. So remember the iron triangle: time, money, and scope. All three things are on this release plan. Basically, we dump everything off of Trello that's not done over here. So here is scope, all of the cards that need to be done. And then we'll put all the cards. So, this client has an MVP identified and they know these are for future release. So we'll still put them on there. And then we have their optimistic run rate and their pessimistic run rate. I know this from empirical data. I know how many cards they do a week. I know the average cycle time it takes for a card. So I can figure out on average, how much time is in between every card delivered. And that's just your run rate. You can do this with velocity as well. So if you're a scrum shop, you can do this exact same thing. You just use a different run rate. But I get what it is on average, and then I get what it is with standard deviation 85% of the time. And that is my optimistic and pessimistic. And so then I use those run rates to create two columns. And because we charge by the week, I can put a number and then this is what it costs every week to do this. You could do the same thing. If you're a product owner, you can get an idea of what your burn rate for your team is, or at least a very relative version of that. And then what I can do is you can see here when it turns red is when it says that's after some deadline. So we can put a deadline over here and it says this is after the deadline you've given me. Maybe their MVP release has to happen at a certain time. So as you can see here, pessimistically, that's as far as we think we'll get before your deadline. Optimistically, this is as far as we get. So you can just kiss those goodbye. Right now, and how the team is operating and what's on the backlog, that's not going to happen. This is really what I manage. I manage the middle. Most of these will probably get done, but some of them won't. So let's talk about that. And so if I'm looking here, they're actually looking pretty good for MVP, but I would really be talking about, all right, these three, can I break any of these down? Can I deprioritize any parts of these to move these up and be a little bit more sure that I'll get this done? And we rebuild this every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, I take all the new data, I dump out the Trello board again, I take all the data from those statistics, and I rebuild this, and we go over it every 2 weeks to manage expectations. Because it's all about, is this juice, what you're going to get here, worth this squeeze, whatever the amount of money it is? And again, it's always that range. It's going to be somewhere in between there. This is for long-term planning. It's not necessarily for near-term planning. Near-term planning is really the board, but this is long-term planning. And what you've seen here, these are all the artifacts that we use with our clients. And we've been doing this now, these versions you're seeing here have been in the last about 5 years. And now Jen Fields runs all our delivery teams, and she's using these as well some more tools they've added in it. But these are the basics. One, this estimation worksheet's how we start. We do our discovery. We use Trello and dump everything in there. Some clients use Jira, but we still use the exact same board layout. Dumping all that into a release plan. Again, each release plan is a little bit different, but it has at least these three elements of the iron triangle. And those metrics we saw, a version of those metrics that inform those plans. So let me jump back real quick. We're coming up on time and I do want to answer questions. So let me get back in the presentation mode. Oops, share that guy. So, oops. So this is just what you're seeing here is kind of what I just showed you. These were just little placeholders to talk about the different things. So let's get to the wrap up. So things I want you to hopefully take away from this. There we go. Focus on value. It's not about time and money. It's about value. It's about return on investment. Yes, I need to know time and money just so I can make a good call on whether the value I'm going to get is going to be enough. And also, are we sure we're going to get that value? Estimated the right level of detail. Remember, red barn, blue barn questions. I don't need, until a later responsible moment. Ranges and uncertainty. Do not give a single, number. That has bitten me in the butt so many times. Ranges and uncertainty. You can't just give and the wider the range shows more uncertainty. The tighter the range is less uncertainty, but there's always going to be some uncertainty in everything because it's all in the future. And the future is made up by guidance counselors and insurance salesmen. I don't know what's going to happen. Plan using empirical data. So when I make these plans, the team is helping me estimate that, at least some representation from the team. And my teams are long running. So I know, like I have data on, it usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks before they hit their actual run rate. And then they get into this run rate. So I can use that data, even though they're doing a different client, but it's usually within the same kind of, they're doing mobile or they're doing web. And I at least have some good empirical data to use from that. But then the second they actually execute, the first 2 weeks in, I rebuild the plan with their actual data. Managing expectations. Every 2 weeks, if not every week, I'm revisiting this with my client. What's new data I learned, anything that has changed that might affect the release plan. And the last thing is, all of these techniques are about having a conversation. Having a conversation with your client. Any client who says, I just want to dump this documentation to you and you give me an estimate, I don't want to work with that person. You need to have the conversation with me. That's a red flag to me immediately. And I need to have the conversation, and then I will come and look at your documentation, and it will add the flavor to the conversation and some more insight. Then when we get into estimating, when I talk to my teams and we're doing estimates and stuff like that, the conversation is actually the more important thing. And the details, getting that level of detail, getting them out of getting so narrowly focused and looking at the top. Tell me about boundaries, integrations. What's your uncertainty? What are your assumptions? Those conversations are critical. And then once I get into it, every 2 weeks, looking at the data, seeing what the data tells us, putting that into our plan, seeing how our plan is now affected, and having a conversation about what that means for setting the expectation of what value is going to be delivered in the future. So that is it. We're gonna wrap this up real quick, and then I'll start do question and answer. So if you want to contact me, several of you already know, but some of you I don't. There's my email, tommy@acklenavenue.com. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want all the things, artifacts I showed you, I will give you. Now I'm going to give them to you in PDF format, but it's not really hard to reverse engineer there's not a lot of logic in them, but I will give that to you. We don't mind sharing this is, we don't care about our secret sauce getting out there. If you're more agile, it just makes everybody better. So I will share that with you if you just connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Like I said, if you want to see my stuff in O'Reilly, you can go to o'reilly.tommynorman.com. Check out Acklen Avenue if you're interested in what we do. Also, like I said, we do office hours and webinars every so often. So if you just go to officehours.acklenavenue.com, it takes you to our latest office hours. Same thing with the webinar. That'll take you always there. Also, Tatiana is going to dump some links to all the Acklen stuff. So our LinkedIn and anything of that stuff there as well. And feel free to contact me afterwards if you have any more questions that we don't get to today.